Hello everyone, I'm Brian and welcome to Watch Complications. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, I suggest you do that. This is the first in a series on making custom watches. For those of you who have been watching on my channel, you know I have a series on making custom dials, and in that series I go through some examples of how you might go about making a custom dial, and that might be, finding an old vintage dial, in a stack somewhere. You could buy some sort of generic dial and apply your own logo to it. You could 3D print a dial. You could go through the entire process of getting a metal blank and then priming it, painting it, pad printing, applying markers, looms, so on and so forth. But that series will continue, and what I will do is take custom dials and put them in custom watches. So this is not just focused on the dials alone. This series is focused on taking whatever dial we might have and making a custom watch out of it, and using one of those custom dial methods. Now there are going to be some new videos in the Making Custom Dial series as related to my next project that I'm working on for a client, which has a dual time window. And here's the blank, and I'm working on the paint and the finish that I want on this particular dial. It's going to be kind of hard to see with the gray and the light. Believe it or not, this was cut out with a water jet. Not laser, not stamped. Getting custom windows cut in dials has proven to be an interesting task for someone who doesn't have, a mill or lathe or something like that. But this is a fun project, so you'll see more videos on this in the Making Custom Dials series coming soon. What I want to do in the meantime is show you my process for working on prototypes. So I've got my Wonderland series, which already has one model called Tea Party. The next model is called Pool of Tears, and what I've done is I've got the sample cases and movements, the dials, and I want to go through the process of putting those prototypes together. Now, in the prototypes, I may not have the final case that I'm going to use. I'm really, in my use of the word prototype, I'm really wanting to see if the look is what I want. The dial color with the dial markers, the logo locations, the case colors, the hands that I want to use. So taking all the components and putting them together and figuring out if it's a look I want. And then if I do like the look, like the design, then I'll probably move to higher quality components, from like cheaper Chinese versions that I can get for a few bucks to higher quality like Swiss made stuff. So this video series is going to walk us through putting those prototypes together so that we can see what the final product looks like, and then I can make a decision if I want to make more of these and put them up for sale. There will be several videos in this series. I'm going to chop up the content so you can digest it in smaller chunks. In this video, I'm going to show you how I apply my custom logo to the dial in the way I want, that I think looks good. In the following videos, I will show you how I attach the dial to the movement, how we attach the hands, how I cut and get the stem to the right length so that it fits, the crown and the case and the movement in the right way. And then we'll put it all together and case the movement inside the case and then see what the final look is like. So I hope you enjoy this little series on making custom watches. I'll put a page up on watchcomplications.com, much like I did with making custom dials, that has the links to the videos so you could watch them there in one spot if you wanted to. But don't worry, there's more videos coming on making the custom dials themselves, so be watching for that. There's more reviews that are coming. I've got a lot of that content to get up, so there's lots more coming. Keep watching, subscribe if you haven't, and hopefully you enjoy this whole series. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is talk about the components I'm going to be working with while I build these two watches. And I'll start with a logo. You can see over on these little pieces of paper here are parts of my logo. These are etched by laser out of a very thin piece of metal and has an adhesive on the back so that it will stick to the dial. I've already applied the logo on the black dial. You can see I've kind of chopped it up into two spots. The hat is under the 12, and then my brand name 106 is over here on the small second subdial. Now if you look on my blog or at some of my other watches, usually the logo will be just here under 12, the hat, and then the 106 directly under it. Now the reason I have the logo in two spots isn't just because it looks cool, and it does. I think it really fits this style pretty well. But the primary reason why is because the dial is guilloché. Now I'm not a native French speaker, but that's close, I think, to the way it's pronounced, guilloché. And what it means is there's a repeated pattern that's turned into the dial, and that means there are ridges. And so this particular logo adhesive that I'm using, it really needs, or is best for, a flat surface. And the hat does fine on this particular surface, but the text is so small that it wouldn't adhere very well to this particular main part of the dial. However, the subdial is a lot less ridged, and so the numbers adhere fine to the subdial. So I've basically put it in two spots, which again adds like a nice little touch to the subdial. I'm not sure, I don't recall seeing this sort of use before in anything I've seen. So one, it's unique, but it's really out of necessity also on this particular design. And guilloche dials are one of the characteristics of this watch series that I'm working on. All of the models have different styles of it, but that's one of the prime characteristics of the series that I'm working on. And I can show you, here is the blue. Again, I've got these in the wrappers right now, and you can see it's got the wave pattern, which is a nice effect on this particular dial. And in both cases, the applied markers are a stainless steel color, and the small second subdial, the markers are printed white, and you can also see the printed minutes around the outside are also printed white. So we've got printed white markers, and we've got applied stainless markers on both of these particular dials. The cases I'm using for these builds are the exact same in terms of style. One is a brushed stainless steel, the other one is a polished black PVD coated case. So they both have exhibition backs on them so we can see the movement in all of its glory. What I'm doing for the color combinations, I'm putting the black dial on the regular stainless steel, and I'm putting the blue dial with the black case. So the movement I'm using in these builds is an equivalent to the ETA or Unitas 6497. Again, if you look at the dial, there's a small seconds complication at 9 o'clock. And you can see here, let me turn this so that the stem is at 3, and you can see that there's the small seconds at 9. Now this movement is an equivalent to the Swiss ETA 6497, but this is a Chinese made version, so it's a lot cheaper. This is 30 or 40 bucks as opposed to 200 or 300 bucks, depending on where you're getting the movements from. So this is just something I like to use when I'm working with new builds, building prototypes. So yeah, this isn't a Swiss movement, but it's nicely decorated. It'll last a long time. It's easily replaceable, low cost, and it keeps reasonably good time. Maybe not as good as a Kosk, Swiss ETA movement, but I'll put on the time grapher whenever we're done with the build, and we'll regulate it and see if we can get pretty good and accurate timekeeping with this particular movement. So I've got a couple of these. One, I left the sort of the default hands on these come shipped just so you can make sure it's working and stuff fine. So those aren't the hands I'm using, obviously. And then I've got another one here that I've already taken the hands off of it. So those are the movements we're going to use, and I'll give you more up-close looks at those as we get to dealing with those. Now the hands, I'm going to use two different hands actually, because again, these are part of a new series I'm working on, and these are technically going to be the same model, but a different variation of the model. So with the black dial, I'm using some white feathered hands. Okay, so there's no loom, and these all three hands have the same sort of style, sort of a white feathered look. And then I've got a more modern looking design hands with a loom that's going to go on the blue. With both of these models, you could get the hands on either or. So if you wanted one, you could buy one, and I would design it however you want. Also, something to be said, if you were interested in actually getting one of these, if you want the Swiss movement in it, I can put the Swiss movement in it. All I just need to do is order the Swiss movement, and they're both the same diameter, same height, so they'll both work in these cases. And these are good quality cases, by the way. I guess I didn't mention that. These are sapphire, so they are high quality in terms of the glass that's being used on these particular cases. So fairly scratch resistant and should last a long time. So you can see that there are some holes here in this paper. This is just a piece of paper and it's against the cork board, but I've got holes that will fit the dial feet so this can lay nice and flat on the surface while I'm working with it. And now I can go about carefully applying the logo. Now there are two parts to this, as I mentioned. There is the hat, which is the right size I want. There is a 10.6 underneath of it, but it's too small. And this is from an older batch of logos I had made and sort of testing, and the 10.6 was too small, but then I get the 10.6, it's the right size. This works out. I can reuse these by cutting off the 10.6 and just use the hat, and then the 10.6 will go over on the subdial. All right, so I'm going to start with the hat, and the first thing I need to do is I'm going to hold this down, and I'm actually going to take an X-Acto knife, and I am going to cut the 10.6 off. As you can see, I've done that there. Where'd my little 10.6 go? You can see it's right here. So I've cut that off, and I don't need that. So I will put that to the side. So take the paper off. Tweezers make everything a little bit easier. A couple good pairs of tweezers. And now I'm just going to get this exactly where I want it, using this other dial that I have as reference, just to make sure that the distance is the same. That the width is good, that it's equal distance between the markers at 11 and 1, and centered with the 12. Just a little twist. And now I am going to press it down a little bit. And there's a couple different ways I use to sort of give it a nice push without, again, damaging the dial in any way. Sometimes I use Q-tips and stuff, but I find a nice unabrasive rounded surface so I can push down on this particular logo. I'm not going to hurt the dial any. Just making sure this is nice and stuck on the dial surface. Again, there's a piece of plastic here, so I'm just going to take this and rub the surface in a nice, calm, collected manner so as not to damage the dial in any way. Okay, so should be pretty good in terms of the glue. Now I am going to take the plastic off the top. All right. Okay, so I've moved in a little bit closer again so you can see. One thing that is good to always have around is some Rodico, because I can see there is a little piece of something on the dial. I'm just going to squeeze that in there and get it out. And that looks pretty good. Now we're going to apply the 10.6 on the subdial. Now, this is the same process. This one I got to be a little bit more delicate with because the pieces of metal are quite tiny. Okay, so I've taken the backing off. So one thing I wasn't sure about when I put this on the black dial was how close to center or how close to the 60 seconds I wanted this to be, but I think I'm going to go just a hair lower on this one. And again, it's something you just gotta tinker with a little bit. And let me zoom in, see that a little bit closer. I'll try to keep the lighting from being too crazy. And I've got it this sort of place, and now I can move it around and kind of get it centered exactly where I want it. Very small maneuvers. to get it exactly where I want. I'm also visually looking at this one, which I carefully did off camera, just to make sure it is exactly where I want it. Once I have it, like I do here, I'm going to lift this off of it. And it shouldn't leave much adhesive behind. If it does, sometimes I gotta clean it up a little bit. That looks pretty good. Let me zoom out. You can see now I've got my 2 dials, and that's how I apply the logo. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video showing me apply my logo to the dial, and in the following videos you'll see me attaching the dial to the movement and the hands and all that other stuff. So keep on watching, subscribe if you haven't, check out the site watchcomplications.com, and you can follow me on Instagram if you wish as well. I shall see you in the next video.